And then things took a terrible turn when he was accused of the murders of his ex-wife, Nicole Brown Simpson, and her friend, Ron Goldman. His trial took place in the 90s, known as the trial of the century, where he was acquitted. Later on, he was found to be civilly liable for their deaths, but acquitted of the criminal charges. And in recent years, we've seen O.J. playing a lot of golf and very active on social media, living life, but privately battling cancer. I want to bring in now my friend and colleague, Ted Rowlands, who actually grew to know O.J. Simpson a little bit personally when he covered his second trial in Las Vegas regarding the theft charges. Ted, talk to us about just how that came about, your relationship with him.
Well, that you remember that he was accused of stealing basically his own memorabilia, and he was on trial there, but he was out on bail, so he could come and go every day. And for those who have met O.J., they know that he's a very talkative person and would talk about football, would talk about anything. So during those weeks leading up and months leading up to the trial, and then throughout the trial, got to know him quite well and continued to correspond with him. I wanted to, of course, sit down with him and do the interview that everyone's wanted to do, and we got very close multiple times of agreeing to some parameters. I had some meetings with his people, and it never came through because no one was really happy with the rules that we were going to make. Bottom line is, you talk about someone who has lived an interesting life. Say what you will about O.J. Simpson. I think we all, after looking at the evidence in Ron Goldman and the murders, sure. His wife and Ron Goldman, Denise Brown. The bottom line is, this man led one of the most fascinating lives ever in history. If you go back, some people, their biggest thing they ever do is they were the best player on their high school football team. He went on to win the Heisman Trophy. Okay, that's a huge. You've done it. Right. NFL Hall of Famer. Boom. Movies. Boom. All that. Then he kills two people. Then he does the incredible. He is up on a double murder charge in the state of California and walks out of the courthouse. It's just an extraordinary life. He was a fascinating person. He would, I think, a lot of people, when he was first found guilty, there was a pretty good segment of the population that had doubts about his guilt. Maybe 20%.
When he was first charged, you mean?
When he was first found guilty. Over the years, that has shrunk down to, I'm sorry, acquitted. Over the years, that has shrunk down to, pretty much down to zero. As we've learned more about DNA and all of that, the evidence was there for that jury to convict him of that double murder. He then was convicted in Las Vegas for basically stealing his own stuff. That was an interesting trial. They turned, but the bottom line is, he changed everything in terms of court TV, people interested in the system. People were glued to that trial, and it was the first time that there was a camera there, and not only the country, the world's attention was on the criminal proceedings in the United States in a way that we hadn't seen before. Wall-to-wall coverage, and it changed everything, and it created court TV, you could argue.
Right. And as I look at these pictures, Ted, as you're talking, we're seeing so many famous faces of people who are no longer with us, sadly. Johnny Cochran has passed away. F. Lee Bailey has passed away. Robert Kardashian has passed away. O.J. had, as you know, the dream team of lawyers. And something interesting, I think it's an important time to share this, the public opinion is what it is. One person who went to his grave believing firmly in O.J. Simpson's innocence, F. Lee Bailey. You knew I was going to say that, didn't you?
You guys know him.
He spoke with us at Court TV. I loved sitting down with him multiple times and talking about it. And he remained friends with O.J., for a long time. And in that famous photo where you see him standing there, O.J.'s in the middle, he's kind of at the foreground of the picture, Johnny Cochran in the background. I remember he said to me, I was smiling like the Cheshire Cat because I knew he was going to be acquitted. I knew. Ted, looking back, did you get that sense that he would be acquitted at the time?
I was very young, watched every minute of his trial. I did not cover it. I was fascinated by it.
Yeah.
And through my lens, I thought he was going to be found guilty because of the blood. And the glove, the Furman stuff, you know, really changed that trial. And Johnny Cochran's advocacy was insane. His clothes, all of it, you know, if it doesn't fit, it was all there to go either way. And we all watched, right? The entire world stopped and watched that verdict.
Right. I mean, and you think there were legends at work. When you think about the greatest closing argument of all time, it probably was that one, Johnny Cochran's right there. Those famous words, as you said, we repeat them all the time. Probably the best cross that was ever done was F. Lee Bailey's cross of Mark Furman. That was devastating. That was how you do a cross and how you win a case. And it's something, it's really sad that someone who was so talented, his life went the direction that it did, and now he's deceased. At 76 years old. I know you're going to continue our coverage of this. Ted, thank you for coming to the studio early to talk about it and share your perspective. And we're going to continue with our coverage of this breaking news, the death of perhaps the most infamous criminal defendant of all time in the United States of America, O.J. Simpson, dead at the age of 76, passing away Wednesday night, surrounded by his family.
Well, if you haven't heard major breaking news this morning, O.J. Simpson, Orenthal James Simpson, is dead at the age of 76 after battling prostate cancer, according to his family. They posted on social media that he was surrounded by his family and died in his home in Las Vegas. He had been suffering from prostate cancer for some time, according to his family. He, of course, was acquitted in the 1994 slayings of his ex-wife, Nicole Brown Simpson, and Ronald Goldman. It was a case that changed the landscape of courtroom coverage and launched Court TV, among other true crime television networks. The obsession with legal journalism took another turn after the O.J. Simpson case. So many of us were glued to every moment of this case. It put Simpson, he was already on the map for being a superstar football player, broadcaster, actor. Then he became a defendant, a criminal defendant in a double murder trial in Los Angeles, and all eyes were on that courtroom. We had everybody in that realm became a household name, from Judge Lance Ito to the prosecution team to his, of course, what they dubbed the Dream Team, led by Johnny Cochran and F. Lee Bailey. From then on, he, of course, beat those charges, remarkably, found not guilty in Los Angeles, but then he had years of trouble. He had a couple incidents in Florida where he moved to after that verdict, and then in Las Vegas, he was on trial again, this time for theft of some memorabilia. He was found guilty there and ended up serving more than a decade in prison in the state of Nevada. Over the years, he's always maintained his innocence or versions of innocence in the deaths of Nicole and Ron. You remember he came up with this collaboration at one point with the story of If I Did It, and talked about what might have happened if indeed he did it. The Goldmans, who won that civil case against O.J. Simpson after the criminal trial he was acquitted in, they ended up taking that and turning it into something different, and that sort of died on the vine. But the bottom line is, this is a guy that was polarizing and was a part of the American story for so many years. O.J. Simpson is dead at the age of 76 again. According to his family, he was surrounded by his children and his grandchildren, who supported him in the years after this in varying forms. His children were always supportive of him in Vegas after he was released from prison. And that's where he lived. He stayed in Las Vegas. He played golf every day. You'd see him on Twitter talking about fantasy football and anything else. He would opine about politics, you name it. O.J. Simpson had an opinion, and he shared it with the world. And now his story is over. O.J. Simpson dead at 76. So they'll be telling stories about O.J. for decades to come, but he has passed away. Krista Ramey is in Los Angeles, a place where O.J. Simpson made a huge mark over the years. She's a trial attorney and watched along with the rest of us as we were introduced to cameras in a courtroom and a trial that took so long, and yet a jury that came back with such a quick verdict. It shocked so many. Others were celebrating. Your initial thoughts when you heard O.J. Simpson is dead?
You know, it's kind of like a strange point in my career, because I went to law school out here in California, and, you know, law professors were, you know, Chris Darden, you know, was one of our professors, our adjunct professors at Southwestern, who was one of the attorneys on this case. And, you know, I have become good friends with one of the members of his trial team. And so I have a little bit of a connection with this, but at the same time, I don't know a lot of the details, you know, because I wasn't in it. But it's a strange point in my career, certainly, you know, having become close with some of the people that I'm close with now out here, and then having watched this as a young undergraduate student, glued to the TV, watching it, you know, when I was a young lawyer. It's a strange ending to his life, which could have been, you know, a lot more glorious than it ended up being, for sure.
Yeah, glorious indeed. And this was a guy that transcended football, did something that few at the time players were able to do, is take that post-football world and go into something else. He was doing those Hertz commercials. He was a broadcaster. Yeah, a lot of ex-players were broadcasters, but then he went into the acting world and was in several movies, got into, you know, he's in the Naked Gun series. He was as household a name as you could come up with. And then when the word came that he was a suspect in his wife's murder and Ron Goldman's murder, people couldn't believe it. This is O.J. He just had this smile on his face. The public persona of O.J. Simpson was nicest guy in the world. You want to hang out with him. And frankly, I got to know him fairly well during the Las Vegas trial. And he was that person in the way he interacted with people. He was very gregarious, and the people enjoyed being around him before the murders, of course, and then to some extent after. He was just an extraordinary individual with an extraordinary life that he led, and that, again, has come to an end. Let's go back, and I remember where the whole world stopped, right, when the word came in that there was a verdict in the O.J. Simpson case. We all gathered around televisions and watched it happen. Let's go back in time and watch that moment where O.J. Simpson was found not guilty of double murder.
We, the jury, in the above entitled action, find the defendant, Orenthal James Simpson, not guilty of the crime of murder in violation of Penal Code Section 187A, a felony upon Nicole Brown Simpson, a human being, as charged in count 1 of the information. We, the jury, in the above entitled action, find the defendant, Orenthal James Simpson, not guilty of the crime of murder in violation of Penal Code Section 187A, a felony upon Ronald Lyle Goldman, a human being, as charged in count 2 of the information.
Wow. What a moment that was. You hear the Goldman family reacting in the gallery. Then you see the attorneys around O.J. and O.J.'s reaction to that moment. There's, man, Stan Goldman, and that case had everything that just captured everyone's attention. Yeah. Robert Kardashian, right next to O.J. there. The Kardashians were launched from that moment as well, one could argue, in that trial. It really, to what extent did you watch that trial, and were you shocked that he was found not guilty? Because a lot of people were shocked that followed that case.
I was watching this trial very intently. I was already applying to law schools. I wanted to be a criminal prosecutor. This trial was like my inside look. And I think that a lot of people that were in my position felt that way. I was glued to this trial. And so it's kind of, kind of ironic now, I'm here commenting on court TV about his passing. But yes, I was definitely glued, and I was very stunned by the verdict. And, it was, there was so much credible evidence of domestic violence for a long time, really, that was circulated about OJ. And I think when he was arrested, most of us were a little shocked, but I don't think anyone was that surprised given that history of domestic violence with his ex-wife. And, he had literally the best trial team that money could buy. And, I've heard Carl Douglas tell stories about how they defended this case, and they were they were geniuses. These lawyers were absolutely the best of the best lawyers, and this verdict really demonstrated that. He put on that glove with the, if it doesn't fit, you must acquit. I mean, God, Johnny Cochran was just, a genius. But here, see, as you're watching him put on the gloves here, you can see he's got a pair of latex gloves underneath. I remember specifically going into our kitchen and pulling out latex gloves and putting them on and then putting gloves over it. And well, of course they didn't fit. You got the latex gloves out underneath. But it was genius that, his attorneys thought, well, let's put the gloves on underneath the gloves. It was almost like they knew that was going to happen. Why are you allowing him to do that?
Yeah, that was such a courtroom moment in history, and OJ played it up perfectly with, then doesn't fit. And for a lot of people argued that case, get into the weeds, they lost it when they decided to try it in downtown rather than in Santa Monica. There was this sort of bravado from the prosecutor at the time saying, we'll try him anywhere, we're confident in the case, and we're not going to, play any games here. That changed everything as well because of what was going on. When you factor in the LA riots and the tenor of the jury makeup was heavily African American, and let's face it, at that time there was distrust in the police, and you throw in Mark Furman and the racism that came out in this trial, it changed the game. The glove was part of it, but Furman was another huge part of it, was he not?
It was, and you're absolutely right to make this point. You got to think of when the LA riots were. They had just happened a few years ago. And, this was all, about, the acquittal of the police officers in the Rodney King beating. And there was a lot of distrust of the police at this time and continued on, for a long period of time. And so you've got all of this kind of happening at the same time as, this verdict is coming out. LA had just burned basically a few years before. And this was definitely an important role. And downtown, the downtown jurors still to this day, we always talk about where we want to file if we can file, right? In the civil world, you're kind of stuck in certain areas, but if you can file downtown, you want to go downtown. And there's just something about a downtown jury. And, in the civil world, they pay a little bit more money, I think. They can understand the plight of people who have been injured, who've been victimized, and, and they want to compensate for the wrongs that other people do. But on the criminal side, that can have the opposite effect. It could, instead of wanting to punish people, you've got people that understand that people are taken advantage of, that they're wronged, and you can't always trust the police and the prosecutors. And that's really what happened here. You had the jurisdiction played a huge role in this, and the pool of jurors that you got. You're not getting jurors from the suburbs, Santa Monica, but it's beyond that. You get jurors from like Agora Hills and Thousand Oaks and these areas in LA that are very conservative and white in Santa Monica. And so downtown, you've got this culturally and ethnically diverse jury pool, and I think that really helped him a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. The other X factor in this case, that if you're just joining us, O.J. Simpson dead at 76 after a battle with cancer. He was surrounded by friends and family, mainly family, according to his family, that announced this on social media. He's survived by his 4 children, Arnell and Jason from his first marriage, and then Sydney and Justin from his marriage to Nicole Brown Simpson. The other X factor was DNA. I mean, Barry Scheck was able to just drone on and on about the science and you know, as much as you wanted to follow it along at that point, this was relatively new, and he attacked every bit of it, and it created, basically that was not a factor where if he were tried today with the evidence that was, I mean, ignore cameras and all that he would have been caught on, but just on the evidence there at the time. But if we had the collective acceptance of DNA, and that jury had seen a few episodes of true crime dramas that you know, showcase DNA, hey, there would have been a totally different trial as well. That's another thing that took place then that now would have been different, correct?
Well, yeah, we take that for granted, right? That this is what, 95 or 96 when this trial was? It must have been 95, 94, 95. But yeah, I mean, now, 30 years later, you know, this technology is much different. You know, you don't have, you know, a generation of Americans that grew up watching Mark Harmon on CSI, you know, NCIS and all the CSI shows that were out there. You know, you've got, you know, people like understand, like kind of get into it. Barry Scheck, that was mind-numbing. I think it put most of the jurors to sleep. You know, so job well done. You know, you make this into voodoo science, then it's voodoo science. You know, that wasn't part of our, you know, understanding of what criminal science was about. You know, back then you didn't have, you didn't really collect that kind of evidence, you know, 10 years before. You know, in the mid 80s. So it's just a different world you're living in now when you think about it than even, you know, then in the mid 90s. So yeah, absolutely.
You know, and getting that part of the equation into a blur was masterful and needed, because if you believe that Ron Goldman's blood was in O.J.'s house, O.J.'s guilty.
Game over.
Yeah. Unless you thought that Furman was spreading it around, which that was the glove. I mean, that's how they got rid of the glove, that Furman planted the glove. It was a defense like no other. Let's go back and remember that moment in the closing arguments from Johnny Cochran, the words to the jury that we still remember like it was yesterday. If it doesn't fit, you must acquit.
O.J. Simpson in a knit cap from 2 blocks away is still O.J. Simpson. It's no disguise. It's no disguise. It makes no sense. It doesn't fit. If it doesn't fit, you must acquit.
what a you know, a summation. You know, some people call it the best close ever, and definitely the most watched closing argument, and had most effect. I think, at least in televised trials ever. At that moment, though, there was still a prevailing feeling, you know, amongst the country and the world that he was going to go down, or not. I mean, it turned out he didn't. This jury just didn't buy this case, and it was something else. After the double slayings, Simpson would tell the Associated Press that we don't need to go back and relive the worst day of our lives. The subject of the moment is the subject I will never revisit again. My family and I have moved on to what we call the no negative zone. We focus on the positives. There are stories that, you know, after he was found not guilty, that there was a party at his house that people didn't show up to because there was this uh-oh feeling collectively amongst those close to O.J. That he had gotten away with double murder, and one of those victims was a beloved member of his family, his wife, Nicole. How, you know, Krista, when you think about O.J.'s behavior after, he didn't go away. I mean, you know, just recently he's talking on Twitter about fantasy football and his opinions on Donald Trump. I mean, this guy seemed to be unabashed. He wasn't shamed into oblivion. No, we kept hearing O.J. stories over the years.
We did, and you know, this is got to be incredibly heart-wrenching for the Goldman family. And you know, one of the things that come to mind is that every time he comes out into the public eye, every time he does something crazy, then it just reopens that wound for this family. And he's also been hiding money from them ever since then, right? And famously tried to steal his own sports memorabilia back probably after selling it to someone.
Well, I did cover that case, and that was the state of Nevada cleaning up what California didn't do. He was set up a bit there, and they went after all the other people that were there that day, the ones with the guns. No one else did 10 plus years in the state pen. It was all about OJ and getting OJ. In fact, the closing argument in that case, the prosecutor got up to the jury and said, we don't tolerate this type of behavior here in the state of Nevada. To the folks, everybody knew what was happening there. That said, it's still, for your point well taken, the Goldman family was tortured over the decades past the acquittal, because it was a public battle over his resources, and the Goldmans were trying to enforce what the civil court decided, that he was guilty and he owed them millions, and he was trying to hide money from the Goldmans, and he seemed to have a hatred for the Goldmans, which had to just have driven them insane. You wonder their feelings today. I'll be interested to see if they say anything publicly, or maybe they have. We'll look into it. Let's get a commercial break here. We'll continue our breaking news coverage of the death of O.J. Simpson at the age of 76 after battling prostate cancer, dying in Las Vegas, Nevada, around his family. We'll get a break in here. We'll continue the coverage throughout the day here on Court TV. We'll also be turning our attention to the Chad Daybell case. Of course, they're up and running out in Idaho. But the breaking news at this hour, O.J. Simpson dead at 76.